The lipstick is wrong. She tastes it in the rearview mirror, stopped at the light, the chemical wax coating her tongue like a warning. The color is violent, red like arterial blood, red like the version of her they reviewed last quarter, the one they called abrasive in the feedback form, the one she promised to soften, to round, to make digestible for men who chew with their mouths open. She wipes it off with the back of her hand. The smear across her knuckles looks like evidence, like something forensic. She reaches for the nude, the shade that erases her mouth into the background of her own face, the color of apology, the color of disappearance. The engine idles. The light changes. She drives. But something in her chest stays behind, screaming into the asphalt where the tires burned. A century ago, in the corridors of the Berg-Holzli Asylum in Zurich, a psychiatrist who had been called crazy by his own mentor began mapping the geography of that scream. Carl Gustav Jung. The name suggests mandalas and mysticism, the collective unconscious, archetypes that seem to belong to myth rather than mundane. But Jung's most devastating insight was not mystical, it was cellular. It was the recognition that we are not who we pretend to be, that the self we present to the world is a construction built over a basement we have spent our lives trying to seal with concrete, and that the contents of that basement, the rage, the ambition, the sexuality, the hunger, do not die simply because we have denied them light. They metabolize, they grow teeth, they become the shadow. And the shadow, denied integration, becomes the puppet master of every choice we believe we are making freely. You do not know yourself, you know your performance, and your performance is killing the woman you could become. Jung defined the shadow as the unconscious aspect of the personality, the unknown face, everything the conscious mind has rejected. But this clinical language obscures the biological reality. The shadow is the migraine that blinds you the night before your presentation, transformed from the anger you swallowed when he interrupted you in the meeting. The shadow is the passive aggression that poisons your collaborations, operating as the ambition you labeled unfeminine and exiled to the dark. The shadow is the obsession with men who cannot love you, returning as the sexuality you locked away to maintain your respectability, the desire that found its only available expression through repetition compulsion, through the compulsion to repeat what you have not integrated. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your exiled self, and it is tired of being in exile. It is hungry, it is feeding on your exhaustion. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Stop calling your patterns fate. Stop attributing your repetitions to bad luck, to the cruelty of others, to the structural conditions you cannot control, though these exist and matter, and ask instead, what in you is choosing this? What in you is served by the very circumstances you claim to want to escape? This question is not comfortable. It implies a complicity that feels like blame, but the shadow does not respond to comfort. The shadow responds to confrontation. To the woman who is willing to look at her own darkness without flinching, to ask what need is being met by her own destruction, to recognize that some part of her prefers the familiar pain of the known to the terrifying freedom of becoming. You are not a victim of your patterns. You are their author. Start writing in another language. The shadow reveals itself in projection. We see in others what we cannot see in ourselves. The woman who is obsessed with the selfishness of her colleague, who returns again and again to the injustice of his advancement, who cannot release her moral superiority to his obvious narcissism. She is not wrong about him, but she is incomplete. She is seeing her own denied selfishness, her own unacknowledged ambition, projected onto a screen that conveniently allows her to despise what she cannot admit she contains. The intensity of her reaction is the measure of her shadow's size. The people who trigger us most violently are mirrors we have not agreed to look into. They are carrying our gold. Stop hating him. Start stealing back what he is carrying for you. The second room is the room of integration. Recognition is not enough. The shadow, once seen, must be brought into relationship with the conscious personality. This is not the same as acting out. The woman who recognizes her aggression and begins to scream at everyone is not integrating her shadow. She is being controlled by it, allowing it to take the wheel she has refused to hold. Integration is subtler. It is the capacity to know your aggression, to feel its heat and its justification, and to choose whether to express it. Difference between fate and freedom. Jung wrote that the shadow is 90% gold. This is the insight that transforms the work from masochistic self-examination to genuine excavation. The shadow contains not only what we have rejected as bad, but what we have rejected as too good, too powerful, too dangerous to our familiar limitations. The woman who denies her intelligence to maintain relationships with men who cannot match it. The woman who denies her beauty to avoid the complications of desire. The woman who denies her leadership because she was taught that authority is masculine, that her proper role is supportive. To shine is to become a target. These capacities do not disappear. They go underground. They become the shadow's treasure, guarded by the dragons of our own fear, waiting for the woman brave enough to claim what was always hers. The integration of the shadow requires the death of the persona, the mask, the nice girl, the good daughter, the reliable colleague, the selfless mother. These roles have defined you, have given you structure and recognition and the illusion of safety. To release them is to step into a void where you are not yet known, not yet named, not yet sure of your footing. You will lose them, the ones who loved your performance, the ones who needed you small, the ones who benefited from your exile of power. This is the price, and it is non-negotiable. If you are not willing to be the villain in someone else's story, you will never be the hero in your own. The third room is the room of the opus. Jung called individuation the great work, the alchemical transformation of base material into gold. The base material is the shadow, the rejected self, the unconscious contents that have directed your life while you believed yourself the director. The gold is the self, not the ego, but the totality, the center that holds both light and darkness in dynamic tension, the woman who knows her own complexity and is no longer frightened by it. This work is not completed. It is engaged. The shadow is not integrated once, but continuously, as new experiences press new contents into the unconscious, as the demands of growth require new renunciations of the old self. The woman who believes she has finished her shadow work has simply encountered a deeper basement, a darker level of the structure, a more primitive layer of the exile. The work continues until death, but the quality of the work changes. The woman who has engaged her shadow recognizes its communications more quickly, responds to its pressures more intelligently, lives less in the compulsive repetition of unconscious patterns and more in the deliberate creation of conscious choice. She becomes the woman who knows her own darkness and is not controlled by it, who knows her own light and is not blinded by it, who can hold the tension of opposites, aggression and compassion, ambition and surrender, sexuality and spirituality, without collapsing into either pole. This holding is the essence of psychological maturity, not the elimination of conflict, but the capacity to bear it, not the resolution of contradiction, but the creative engagement with it. The woman who can say, "I contain multitudes," and mean it, and not be destroyed by their coexistence. The shadow work is political. The structures that oppress depend on our cooperation with our own diminishment. They depend on our willingness to perform the acceptable self, to exile our own power, to police ourselves more effectively than any external authority could. The woman who integrates her shadow is not only healing herself, she is refusing the collective assignment of her darkness. She is reclaiming what the culture has declared unfit for female possession. Her individuation is an act of resistance, a demonstration that the categories of acceptable femininity are constructs that can be dismantled, that the exile was never necessary, that the basement was always part of the house. You were never broken. You were taught to hide what would have made you whole. The lipstick in the rearview mirror, the wrong shade, the visible shade, the shade that announces rather than disappears. The woman who has done her shadow work does not reach for the nude. She does not wipe away the evidence of her own visibility. She recognizes the trembling in her hands not as weakness, but as ignition, not as fear, but as readiness. She knows that the version of herself they called intimidating was not too much. It was simply unintegrated, acting out rather than acting with full consciousness. She knows that she can be bold and strategic, visible and safe, powerful and contained. She knows that these are not opposites to be chosen between, but aspects to be held together. She drives on. The light has changed, but more has changed than the light. Descend. The flashlight is in your hand. The door is already open. Do not fear what you will find in the basement. Fear the rest of your life spent upstairs, pretending the scream is not yours.